Holy smokes. First and foremost, good to be here at Monsterpalooza. It's my favorite convention. Everybody else too, right? Yeah. The best one. And I'm really excited because I remember when this show happened, which was now 10 years ago, if we want to say it. But this is a big deal back when this started out. So first, let me introduce everybody that's here. The creator, they're all writer-directors, but the creator of the series Masters of Horror, Mick Garris. Yeah! Always furthest to the left. Mr. William Malone, right here. Fellow New Yorker, Mr. Larry Cohen. Oh, he already got another call. I hope it's Larry Cohen, guys, come on. And last but not least,
jokingly say, wouldn't it be great if we could all get together for our dinner sometime? Wouldn't that be fun? And we'd all say, you know, we really need to do that. And nobody was willing to do that until I decided, if I don't do something, nobody will. And it took me about a week of working with everybody's schedules and everything to try and put together a dinner. And at the very first one, there were 12 of us. Bill was there, I was there, it was Guillermo del Toro, John Landis, Toby Hooper. It was really great. And everybody had such a good time that it took me an hour to put together the next one every week. And every time there'd be more and more directors coming, and we started to talk about how great it would be to put our own fates in our own hands. And so I came up with an idea of how to do that through a weekly hour-long series where you'd get the Masters of Horror, but you couldn't tell them what to do. As long as they would come in on time and on budget, they could do whatever they wanted and have pretty much creative control. And so it was a really tough sell, we thought, but the very first place we went to was Anchor Bay and IDT. And in the meeting they said, how much and when do you start? And it started right now. And so it really turned into the dream job. And horror was not on television much at all. But Anchor Bay was going to make it whether there was a network sale or not. And Showtime wasn't looking for a series, realized they got a real bargain. They only paid 10% of what the show cost for a licensing fee. But that allowed us to say, you're paying so little, you have no input. So leave us the fuck alone.
And they did. Anthologies that still aren't happening there.
No, anthology movies are popular in the horror genre. Anthology television, you know, I'd worked on a couple of them. Bill had done Tales from the Crypt. I worked on Amazing Stories, was my first job, writing and directing, and had worked on Tales from the Crypt as well. Tom did a Tales from the Crypt, you know, and other than Tales from the Crypt, horror and anthology were four-letter words that was on there.
Now, it's funny when you talk about how it's very rare that a deal comes together as easily as that, where somebody says to you, you know, how much and when.
Well, there were years getting to that
point. But for the other directors on the panel, what did you guys think of this concept when Mick brought it to you? Like the idea of, all right, I'll give you an hour to do whatever story you want, or, you know, what did you, were you skeptical or like, oh, that sounds great, let's do it?
Well, I mean, personally, I thought it was terrific. First of all, because Mick was going to produce it, and I knew that, you know, he'd run interference on whatever was maybe coming down from the top. And, you know, it's a dream opportunity to make your show the way you want to do it. Because a lot of times, I'm sure you're aware of, you know, a lot of times people stuff with people, oh, that guy did a terrible job on that. You know, the studio came and recut it and turned it into trash, and that's happened on numerous projects. And you know, so it was a great opportunity to come in and do something, keep it on time and on budget. I don't know. But it was a dream opportunity.
And how did you feel about the whole idea of the Masters of Horror, Larry, kind of coming into this project?
Well, I thought it was a good opportunity to do a show, and who am I to say no? And
you're one of the greatest writers in Hollywood, so.
Well, that's true. Now that you mention it, yeah. I had always made my own movies and done everything I wanted to do, and nobody had told me what to do anyway. But this was something different, and it was an hour show, and it was like, you know, short form, and everything was organized up in Vancouver with the same crew and the same production staff, and you didn't have to do anything but show up and go to work and direct your scenes, and you didn't have to think about anything. I didn't have to worry about paying the bills or any of the, dealing with any of the complaints and things like that. They took care of everything. So I did the show. Unfortunately, I got up there, and it was the rainy season. They waited to hire me till towards the end, when it rained every day, and it was freezing cold.
And you deserved it.
So I thought Mick was trying to kill me, actually, and he was. But anyway, I did get through it. But it was a very tough shoot because of the weather. But I was fortunate to be able to get Michael Moriarty, who had been in 4 of my movies, to come and play in this one. And that was the 5th one we did together, and he was great. It was one of the best ones we ever did. And I think it was a very good episode.
The writer David Scow is here.
Yeah, where's David?
He's in the back.
Here's in the back. David,
David was wonderful, and I said to David, since I've written a lot of shows, and some of them I didn't direct, and I never really liked the way I was treated, I said to David, I want you to be on the set every day, every scene, and we discuss everything and any changes we make or any suggestions I have. I want to run them by you. Isn't that true? And you were there?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
He also wrote Tom's. That's right.
In fact, there's only one guy sitting over that hasn't directed something I've written, Mick.
There you are.
But thank you all 3.
But did anybody ever treat you as well as me?
No.
All right. You know the
No,
truth.
wait a minute.
Well, except for Tom and Bill.
Okay, now there was another guy here.
Yeah, and for Tom, you did an episode in season 2, so you kind of already knew what to expect because the first season had aired, and you kind of saw what everyone else was doing. So, how did you feel coming into the fold and getting a chance to direct something for Masters of Horror?
I felt terrific about it. I was friends with, I've known Mick since Amazing Stories. I directed an Amazing Story. And I met him, and I also met Richard Matheson for the first time, who was a god of mine. Well, I mean, it was just, I have nothing bad to say about any of it. And I worked with David J. Scow, and there was a, Mick did an amazing thing with Masters of Horror. Directors know everybody in town except other directors. I mean, because we meet actors through, auditions, and we meet writers through, as we're working on different projects. But there's, at least for me, there was very little contact with other directors until Mick started having the Masters of Horror dinners. And they came out of the fact that Mick was one of the first guys, I don't want to say how long ago, who started doing interviews with people. And that's, so there's, you're talking 30 plus years here of relationships. And Mick brought us together, and I had a huge amount of pleasure, and I've learned so much out of the dinners and the social relationships and the friends I've made. It's been one of the nicest experiences I've had in Hollywood. And making the show was also totally pleasurable.
And Mick can really cook. I'm telling you.
That's what she said.
I'll start with Mick about this, and then the other directors can chime in if they can give some insight. But so I hear a show like this, and some of them are original scripts, some of them are adaptations from other authors and stuff. So how did everyone pick or get assigned their story? Did you have, I don't know, a series of scripts that are like, well, here's what we've got?
It was kind of half and half. We asked the directors if they had stories they wanted to tell that either they had in mind or had written or wanted to write, or working with writers that they knew. And then about half of the scripts we developed from pitches from other writers. Or there would be stories. For example, Clive Barker gave me a story for each season that I adapted. And as a writer myself who started as a screenwriter first, I wanted to do something original based on one of my own short stories for the first one, and then the second one I did with Clive Barker. But we would have about half and half, And that's kind of how Larry and Tom, I think you,
Am I correct? You wanted more scripts than we actually shot.
yes, yes, we developed like 30%
Because I
more.
know you sent me a couple.
We sent you 3, I think. But so it was half and half. Some of the directors developed their own. For example, John Carpenter did not. But he liked the first one, Cigarette Burns, with Drew and Scott, Drew McQueen and Scott.
On DVD later.
Yeah. And so he wanted them to work with him the second season on his show, and they wrote Pro Life for him. So it was about 50-50. But can I just really quickly want to veer off just to say how long these relationships last. Bill and I met when my first job in the movie business was answering phones for the original Star Wars as a receptionist in 1977.
And I want to point out, you were in a dentist's office. You had a dentist's office on Riverside.
On Riverside,
That's
I
where
was
Blue
losing
Still
that.
was.
And Bill was working at Don Post Studios creating the Star Wars masks that they sold commercially. Larry Cohen had just made God Told Me To, and I went and interviewed him while he was editing The Private Lives of J. Edgar Hoover for Cine Fantastique when I was doing journalism. And Tom and I met on Amazing Stories, which was my first real Hollywood job. And then he acted in The Stand for me.
That's right.
So, anyway, I just wanted to, these relationships run really deep and wide.
Let's start some of the clips so we can see some of the work that you guys did and talk about it together. The first one I have queued up. Mick, you had done 2 episodes, Chocolate for season 1 and for season 2, Valerie on the Stairs, which was based on a Clive Barker story. So I pulled
The original idea for this.
The original
It's not
idea.
a short story.
Right, okay, so it's an original Clive Barker idea, and I pulled a clip from Valerie on the Stairs because there's some fun people in this clip, and you know, it might get a little gross, so let's see this and we'll talk about it. Who is that gentleman in the Black Devil?
You perhaps saw him in the other room. That was Tony Todd as Open.
Yeah, great to meet that.
It's probably a good idea that that scene did not continue if there are any underage people.
Yes, but you should buy the Masters of Horror box set and watch it. So let's talk a little bit about that scene and just in this episode, because one of the fun, unique things about this is you guys all got to work with K&B. They did every episode, minus the ones with the other directors from, the Asian directors from, yeah. So, I don't know, set us up that clip. How much collaboration did you have with K&B?
A lot. You know, this was the first time we really worked. Well, Riding the Bullet was the first time I worked with K&B, and they were great. And they were friends, and they put bids in on the stand way back in 1993. And I always really loved these guys. But this is where, Riding the Bullet was where we started to work together. And on this, it was just like such a great relationship. They would have designs done for the Otakai character that Clive had created in his head. And Clive had a lot of ideas on how that should look. And then I contributed a lot to that. But we refined them. You know, it became very difficult because he's got all these scarifications rather than tattoos that had to be appliances and all. Poor Tony really had to work his Candyman ass off. But, you know, what's great was that we did whatever we wanted to, even if it went into a sexual mode or a violent mode or whatever, and we were able to unlock our storytelling imaginations. And that's a really difficult thing. You're rarely allowed to do that, and this was such a great collaboration. The point was to get people who were contributing to this and proud of doing something different and new and special. And, you know, I was best known before the Stephen King stuff as doing like Steven Spielberg and family-oriented things like Hocus Pocus and Batteries Not Included, Amazing Stories, before the Stephen King thing turned direction. But this, doing something entirely of my own, there's a very strong erotic nature and it kind of really kind of evil pulse to my nice guy exterior does not be mine.
You should watch Chocolate, that's all I'm saying. Just got some stuff in that.
Please.
All right, so for the second clip, I actually pulled one from Larry's episode, Pick Me Up. And the clip I showed you. Yeah, the guy that said yeah.
David Scow said that.
This just, I mean, because I have a dark sense of humor, this clip just cracks me up. So that's why I chose this one. Let's watch a bit from Pick Me Up, Larry Cohen's episode of Masters of Horror.
Put the rest of it on.
So I love the Michael Ferrari in this again. He's so great in this part. But I love the delicious irony that the other guy watching is also a serial killer, and the kind of fun thing about Pick Me Up is it's two serial killers kind of on the same turf, kind of trying to outdo each other, I guess. So I mean, I know it's based on one of David's stories, but this feels like something that you would have...
No, it was a script too, he wrote the script. You know, we fooled around with it a little bit, but it was his script, he wrote it, he deserves all the credit for it. I was just an innocent bystander.
I guess the point I was getting...
I've never seen this before, to tell you the truth.
Really? Wow. Well, I wanted to ask all you guys this anyway, but...
I don't remember this at all. Did I direct this, David? Did I direct this scene?
That was second unit.
Did you see me there? Mick must have come in and done this.
Well, I was going to ask about, for all you guys, the casting process, because you shot this in Vancouver, and yet you were able to bring somebody that you worked with on a lot of your pictures to the film. So was it kind of a mix of half and half people that you like to work with, but then you had to use some of the Canadian actors as well?
We had a budget for 2 American actors to be drawn up.
Okay.
And then everybody else had to be drawn from the local talent pool, which fortunately in Vancouver is quite deep, especially at that time. It seems to have migrated more towards Toronto again recently, and you'll find a lot of the Canadian talent is back there. But yeah, I was lucky enough to get 3 actors from the U.S. because my cast was really small, so the cost was less. But
Well, Michael was a Canadian resident.
that's right.
Oh.
So he denounced his American citizenship. He's crazy about it.
He's not joking.
No, I'm not kidding. He got crazy. He was on a TV series called Law and Order, one of the highest rated shows. He was one of the leads. He was winning the Emmy Award every year for Best Actor. And one day he decided he was just going to walk off the show and announce his American citizenship and leave the country. I don't know what he was protesting about. But the night before he left, he said to me, maybe I shouldn't have done this. What can I say?
Quite a character. How did you hook up with Michael? Because again, you guys have a long history with 5 pictures together.
Yeah,
How did you meet him?
I was going to make a picture called Tree, the winged serpent. And I was sitting in a cafe out at the Lincoln Center in Logan, a friend of mine, and there was Michael Moriarty at another table with his wife. And I started explaining to her who this guy was, and that he'd won the Tony Award for Best Actor on Broadway, and the Golden Globe Award twice, and the Emmy Award twice, everything but the Oscar, and how great he was. And then I turned around and he was smiling at me, he'd overheard what I was saying. So I walked over to the table and I said, hey, I'm trying to put a picture together. Would you be interested in that? He said, send me the script. That guy didn't say send it to my agent. He said send it to me. He lived near Lincoln Center, so I sent it over there. And the next day he called me and said he wanted to do it. That was it. I had him in the picture. After that, I never let him go.
Excellent. The next clip that we have is from Tom's episode from season 2. We all scream for ice cream. And it's, I think, an extra gooey scene to show this wonderful
William
chat.
Forsythe, by the way.
And William Forsythe, the star of this episode, is here as well.
No CG there.
Those of you all practically, Tom, so many questions about this, but the first...
That's what happens when you put too much chlorine in the pool.
Well, first of all, so you did this with, obviously that gag was candy. But you know, it's very reminiscent of some of the gags you did in Fright Night, which, Fright Night, everybody. So, can you talk a little bit about your relationship with Candy, working on this episode and pulling off quite an impressive gag like that?
Howard Berger was an assistant on Child's Play.
Wow.
And
The
so,
B of KMP.
yeah, so it must have been, he was the one that was with me on this. And in-camera effects, the old-fashioned way. It's the same gag from Billy melting in Fright Night in a lot of ways. The hand that's up here in front is a puppet hand, so that can, you know, that can really look like it's melting. Camera's here, real actors here, puppet hand here. So the hand, you know, so the hand can be melting, and it's not. And then you have the real actor with latex, and a lot of goop on them. And then as you cut back and forth between the poor guy reacting, watching all this happen, you go back to the puppet. And the guy, the head and everything is the puppet, and then you can really go to work, making him dissolve. But the prototype for it is Billy in Fright Night, where he's on the stairs. And there, that was a visual mat. That was a puppet hand, the real actor, and this was matted in the hand, so it looked like it was all in one. Yeah.
How long did something like that take to shoot? Because
That was a long time.
Yeah.
That was a full day. Yeah, close to it. Yeah, the act. I can't remember. I
10 years remember anything.
So it seemed to me. I hope I had a B unit, but I don't remember. The actor who was in the hot tub was an American living up there. I don't remember his name either, but he was very good. David J. Scal wrote it. It was an adaptation, and it was off of a short story by
John Ferris.
By John Ferris, the very big horror writer.
On Tom, the actor's name is Colin Cunningham.
Colin Cunningham, thank you very much. The clown was William Forsythe, who's outside signing, who is a really, really just terrific actor. And very, very strong actor.
Can you talk briefly just about, because one of the things that stands out about your episode is William Forsythe and kind of the clown design, and he's got, I think, two different looks in it, where he's a normal clown from the flashbacks, and then right there where we saw he kind of had a little bit of a more evil, sinister look to him. Do you remember, was that something that you and the KME guys kind of came up with together, or did they recommend it? How did you decide on the design of William's clown?
Yeah, but here's a bit of truth. Everything you do, you always feel like you made mistakes, and you wish you'd done other things. When I was doing that, William Forsythe said, this should be Emmett Kelly. This is a guy with brain damage. He should be putting the stuff together out of a garbage pan, putting the clown costume together. Emmett Kelly was, back before he was born, but he was humanizing the clown, He had a bowler hat, and he didn't have any ruffles. He had like thrift goods store clothing. And I've always regretted that I didn't do that. And the reason I didn't is when I got up there, Costumes presented me with this full-on clown outfit, which was beautifully designed for like Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey. And they put so much money in it, I didn't have the heart to change it. It was a very, very nice gal who did the costume design. The design of the makeup was Howard, taking him, from being, sort of simple and sweet. He's simple and sweet, some kids screw him over. He comes back 30 years later, and he starts knocking them off as adults. So it's a variation on it, and at the same time, it's that ice cream truck that so many of us grew up with coming around in the summer. But I mean, I think it's a terrific episode because of William and because of the other guy who was the lead, who was in The Wire.
Lee Tergesen.
Lee Tergesen. So what I had, and so what I had was really good actors, and Mick provided a really smoothly functioning machine up there. That could carry along, really, really well. It was small, it was flowing smoothly. And I think during the action scenes, I had like 4 cameras. We shot with Aries. We shot with, was it 35 or 16?
It was all 35.
It was all 35. And that's the last time I shot film. So, I've never since then I've been on, 4K res. So there's something sad about that too.
All right, and last but certainly not least is William Malone's segment from season 1, The Fair-Haired Child. There's a little bit of a spoiler in this thing, but it's a cool scene. I want everybody to see it. So here's a snippet from his episode of Master. I know you a little bit. I know your love of monsters and creatures and effects and all that stuff personally. So what was it about the story that that stood out to you that you felt you could kind of bring those elements
Well,
to?
actually, I was saying, Mick actually, I think it broke down into 2 scripts. And actually, there was another script that I wanted to do. And Mick, we had lunch one day. I really wanted you to do this one. And I was reticent to do it mainly because I felt that the script was rather sedentary. And I, wanted to do stuff that's rather sort of greedy and long. I thought it was really boring or something. And that's what I was afraid of. But ultimately, I think it turned out okay. So,
And there was always the encouragement to the filmmakers to make them their own. We didn't want the show to have the same style every week. The whole reason to bring in the Masters of Horror was to let them do what they do. Bill is flat vision.
and I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that we sort of headed me in that direction because actually I was very pleased with the way it turned out. Now we were talking about casting, and it's kind of interesting. There was Lindsay Pulsifer, who unfortunately you don't see in this clip, who's the main character in this, and she did a wonderful job. I remember that I actually didn't know any of these actors going into it. Lindsay came in for a greeting, and I remember she was like the last person I saw on a Friday night. All that weekend, I was like, we gotta get her. I can't get her. I don't want to let her go because she had something really unusual about her. And she later wound up doing, I think, what was the no, it was the very,
We'll look it up later.
I think Hatfields and Coins. And she was in that, and I think she was nominated for an Emmy for it. So it was great. Anyway, but we also had, originally, I had cast Alice Creed in the Laurie Petty part. Okay, and Alice Creed, if you don't know, she was in Ghost Story. She was the young malicious ghost in that. And she was also the Borg Queen from Star Trek and so on and so forth. Anyway, I was dying to do a thing with Mick. I want to beat him up forever because he actually worked with her. But I wanted her to be in this, and she was doing Silent Hill, and they kept her 1 day extra, and it screwed me. So I said, who can I get? And I said, well, let's go the complete opposite of Alice Creed. So I got Laurie Petty. Just a quick story. Laurie shows up, her hair is cropped like this, as you see it here. And I remember my heart sinking, but how am I going to make this work? And one of those stupid moments of things that you say that you regret forever, I was in the makeup department, I said, with Laurie and the wardrobe and the hair person, I said, we got to do something to make her look less severe. And she looked at me. Actually, later on, she sent me a note. She says, "You were right." But so she, yeah. And you mentioned the weather. I had the exact opposite thing happen. When I shot the show, there were specific looks that I wanted for each scene. There was a scene up in the forest, and where Lindsay gets knocked off by this truck. And in that scene, I really wanted it to be misty. I wanted like overcast and misty, so that it was nice, soft. And I wake up in the morning, it's misty. And it stayed misty all day long. It was like, I think so. Thank you. Then we went out and shot the scene by the lake, where what I wanted to do was, there's an old gag, we're going to shoot it in black and white film, actually on black and white film. And there's an old thing that they used to do with the Westerns movies, where they use a red filter, and it would make the skies very dramatic. But that only works if you have a clear blue sky and then puffy clouds. So it's got to be dark blue and then puffy, and then you have this really dramatic looking scene. I get there, and it's perfect. And we shoot the scene, and the moment I see it cut, clouds start rolling. Really? Thank you, Canada. That's all I have to say.
Wow. And what about the creature design? Because I know that because you're a monster guy, you got a lot to say about it.
Well, I designed the character. Really, what happened was, and I was a little concerned because John Carpenter had just done the Cigarette Gardens, and he had a character who was not too dissimilar. And I begged John if it was okay if I could just look at a couple of shots, I want to make sure I didn't cover anything you were doing. And fortunately, it was different enough, so I designed a different character, and I turned it over to K&B, who I had worked with before on Tales from the Crypt. And in fact, actually everything I've done, I've been House on Haunted Hill with him, and Fear.com and all that stuff. So with Greg and all those guys. So they did that, and I cut down on the design a little bit as I simplified it, because the original design, which I later used in my film Parasomnia, was more complex, and I felt that they wouldn't have time to actually do it correctly, because on a TV schedule, you have to be able to knock stuff out. But they did a great job, and I was very pleased. Walter Payton did a great job as the treatment quality. It looks great.
Why don't we open it up to the audience? Does anyone here have any questions for any of these gentlemen? Right up front here, sir. So everyone can hear you.
I see a recurring theme in a lot of your writing, usually about a beautiful woman who's tortured and seductive, and then she gets revenge. Am I wrong, or is that not something I see a lot of?
It's certainly in a couple of the things. I do realize that I've written a lot about fractured relationships, but more familial than romantic, or in that regard. And my own background, I had a fractured childhood and all this. But I think there's something about an impossible love. Valerie upstairs was to me about love that is impossible. That you truly, for a while, and I still do it in my novels and things, it's kind of emo. Rather than, so actually, before emo. But before emo films. I would agree with you, although she really has more control over things. My least favorite direction in horror these days is torture, rape, mutilate a woman, and then she gets back in the last 3 minutes, 87 minutes of torture, 3 minutes of revenge, bloody revenge, and it's feminist. That is bullshit. Well, I would love to show that horror is not for teenagers. In every country but the U.S., I go to festivals all around the world and see these wonderful pieces of art and drama and masterful filmmaking where nobody but the U.S. studios think that horror is for teenagers. If you make it about and for and by teenagers, then it's just a self-perpetuating morass. But some of the greatest works of literature, not just Stephen King and Clive Barker and Jim Matheson, but way beyond, all around the world is horror. And I think it's a very valid, rooted in emotions. That's what sticks with you after the credits roll, is if you can tap into it.
When do you think that changed? I know this is like, with movies that we grew up on, in theaters, from the Black Lagoon and, House on Haunted, the original House on Haunted Hill, had adult.
I didn't see those in the theaters.
Okay. Maybe should. Okay, anyway. But no, seriously, they had adult characters. They weren't teenagers trapped in a blah blah blah, or teenagers caught out in a whatever. And you could make movies that were about, adults. And
the 80s.
Yeah, and that's gone. It's just gone. You can't make a movie. You cannot go to a studio and say, pitch a movie where, the characters are 25 or 30.
It happened in the 80s, or the late 70s. Really, Halloween was the first, and Friday the 13th. And they realized that marketing to teenagers was the easiest, quickest way for box office. And suddenly, horror became, it's always been a ghetto, but it became a teenage ghetto. And it's really sad. And it's what's so gratifying about going to South Korea, Switzerland, Spain, and the UK, and Australia, and see movies made for grown-ups.
More questions from the audience, anybody? Just raise your hand if you
I'd like to pose a question on Fright Night real quick, because the movie came out when I was like 5 or 6. I've been watching that, showing friends forever, and you mentioned Billy and his sequence where he melts on the stairs. And it brings up the question, you can imagine like me and my elementary friends debating this forever. What kind of creature was he? Because we had ghoul, mummy, homunculus, just all kinds of
He was
things.
Renfrew, Dracula's assistant in the original. And he'd been bitten, but he hadn't been carried over. But he'd been bitten, and the promise was that he would be taken in completely and get immortality. But until then, he was the one who could work and go out in the daylight. Thank you.
So, Child's Play probably came out before I was even born. And I remember after going through my dad's movie book and watching all his horror movies, he let me see Child's Play. And that movie, I watched it before I even came here just because I thought it'd be fun. It still scares the shit out of me. And I wanted to ask you a question because I've seen so much new horror movies, because any horror movie that comes out, I'll go see it because I'm such a big fan. And none of those movies are as scary as yours, and they're all so much newer, and they have all the new technology, and they're still like not even close to how amazing your films are. So what makes yours so different?
Well, thank you very much. Larry?
Talent.
Okay, the first hit I hit, serious answer, the first real hit I had was Psycho 2. Before that was The Beast Within, which was not a hit. But Psycho 2 was. Okay, Psycho 2 forced me to study Hitchcock. I mean, like a graduate course, I ran every Hitchcock movie. There's suspense sequences that are done visually. Otherwise, I call them visual set pieces. It's where the story moves forward without any dialogue. And you are using the audience's expectations and how you cut and where you direct attention to build and keep building and keep building until you pay it off. The best example of that in Child's Play is there's an 8-minute sequence where the mother comes home, having seen her son in jail, and is the boy insane or not, and she's really depressed and discouraged, and she goes to throw the good guy box away, and the batteries fall out. Now the batteries fall out. What's that mean? That means that goddamn doll has been talking and walking, and it hasn't had any batteries in it. So she picks the doll up, and she turns it over on its back so the doll is facing down. She opens the back of where the battery case is in the back, no batteries, and then immediately the doll's head does a 180 and turns and looks up at her and says, "Wanna play?" Okay? And she freaks out and almost drops the doll. But that begins the whole sequence. That takes her into the living room. And she drops the doll, and the doll goes under the couch. Can you think of anything worse than sticking your hand under the couch when you're in the darkness, when you know something is there that could rip your fingers off? No, but it keeps going and going and going. And because she has to prove the innocence of her child, she eventually ends up turning on the fireplace and lifting Chucky up and saying, "Talk to me, or I'm going to throw you in the fireplace and burn you." And finally, at that moment, the doll turns and comes alive at last and says, "You bitch," and goes for her throat. Okay, so if you look at that, that is a visual set piece that is building all the way through with almost no dialogue. And it goes for almost 8 minutes. And I learned that by studying Hitchcock. And they don't do that today. The other thing that I did, and this goes to writing, and Larry can talk about this, or any of the guys here, I very deliberately tried to create people that you cared about and could emotionally identify with. And the reason for that, and this is not to sound manipulative, but the more you care, and the more danger they're in, the scarier it is. That means you have to have humanity and heart. And those are two things that are quite often missing. So but it's that kind of visual structuring which you'll see in any Hitchcock film. And if you ever take a course in Hitchcock, You can pull the fight on the nose of, all of those things that Hitchcock did. They're visual set pieces on the Statue of Liberty. It is just replete with them. But I really learned from Hitchcock. And the greatest film, the film that was definitive in my life when I was like 13 or 14 was Psycho. And that's when I knew film had changed. I knew horror had changed. And what you get is you get the mass production of Psycho. The first slasher film, the mass production of that is Halloween, Carpenter's Halloween, 77 or 78. Then it goes commercial, where it starts to become a numbers game, Friday the 13th. Everything is getting more and more derivative. And then you end up where you no longer have the skill, I hate to say that, to make anybody care about your characters in the writing. And so you start to go into violent, repetitive violence. And then repetitive violence starts to become less and less able to move you or shock you. And then you go into deliberate gore. And then you go into torture porn. And every one of these things, there is a counter reaction to it. But great horror is when you put heart into it, so you care about the people. Child's play, who could you care about? Mother's trying to save her child, and the kid is 6 years old. I mean, what more vulnerable situation can you get? And the little boy is telling the truth. But it's such a patently insane situation. He can't be the truth. It can't be. And you, as the audience, knows it is. Okay, that's Hitchcock saying, put the dynamite under the table, and then you light it. The suspense is when people come in, they're sitting around the table talking, and they don't know the dynamite's there, but you do as the audience. It's the same kind of thing. And these guys all know that and a lot more. Thank you.
You're all amazing directors, in my opinion, and just in all your films and short films, you have amazing monsters, special effects, and the kills, like the melting and the amazing. So, what are your thoughts on practical effects versus CGI? How monsters nowadays are mostly CGI.
Let me take that one.
As the former makeup effects guy.
Okay, now I don't know how you feel about it, but it's like if I see a CG monster, it never looks like it's part of the movie. I don't care how beautifully it's done. There's just something about it because of the fact that the computer can always do it so perfectly, and in reality, it's never that perfect. And that's what's missing. And in all my films, I've tried as much as possible to use practical effects. Like in House on Haunted Hill, people say, oh, it's a CG monster. It's not. There's no CG in that monster whatsoever. There's only 2 shots in that entire film that are CG. But to me, CG is a great tool. I love CG for like compositing and I mean, you can't beat it. I mean, for those kinds of things. But as far as creating monsters, it will never replace practical effects just because of those weird things that happen when you're shooting that you don't even think about. And later on you go, wow, look at that, that's really cool. Accidental things that happen during shooting.
I kind of agree with that, but I also think we're in a state of evolution and its tools. A lot of people say, I have to work with 35mm film. Well, the tools are changing, and I've seen beautiful CG work that you can't tell is CG, and often it's working together with practical effects and to highlight and affect those things, to make them realistic. It's the best CG. You don't know you're seeing CG. But even the first one, the first Jurassic Park, is a masterpiece, and those CG creatures have weight and heft, and you suspend your disbelief. I think it's all how you use the tools, and you can have shitty CG or great CG that doesn't feel real or have weight or anything like that. But it really is how the tools are used, and there's just more tools in the toolbox as film evolves.
Absolutely correct. One thing I will say is I was watching Aviator, the picture with by Howard Hughes. And I remember seeing the airplane crash thing when I was going over Beverly Hills. This is great CG. I changed my mind. Then I read it was all practical effects. It was all miniatures and stuff. I said,
In closing, Nick, since you were kind of the creator of the show and put this all together, and right now I can't think of a better time for horror television. There's just so much good stuff that I can't believe Hannibal was on NBC. Really. Would it be easier or harder to do imagine horror now, considering the climate of television?
It's much more difficult. It's much more difficult because there is so much horror out there, but there has never been an openness to anthology on network television. They want you to embrace these characters, even if they're anti-heroes like Dexter or Hannibal Lecter, and get to know these people that you have a bond with every week, or if you're starting to do all that. So it's at least as hard now, and I've been trying to do something along those lines. And we're making progress on something that I'm not ready to talk about yet, but I think will be very exciting to the people out there who do like Masters of Horror, including me. So it's not any easier, even though the landscape is much greater than it's ever been in television. And I think it's a really exciting time for television. I frankly see more good television than I see great movies. Yeah. The more expensive a movie to me, the shittier it is. You know, and it's where you can tell stories about human beings and go in turn, whereas movies have become theme parks.
Before we close, I just want to thank Nick for creating the show and running it so well and making it so successful. Thank you for the National Horror.
We want to make a plug for
the Hollywood Horror Museum, for one thing, but I also want to point out Marshall Harvey, who edited one out of every 3 episodes of this. Well, you had it in Fear Itself, and that went in the dump. That was, they kidnapped my baby and raped it.
On a happy note.
The Hollywood Horror Museum, Houston Huddleston at the door here is kind of in charge of it. Tom and I and some of the other people in the genre are helping them put things together to have a home for the history of our genre here in Hollywood. So,